voice from the field. Mrs. Alamar, welcome. You have been indeed an internally displaced person from Eastern Ghouta, moving to Idlib. You are now working for an NGO called Huras, working with displaced children in Syria, which is of course a very difficult environment. So maybe can you share us a little bit your experience as ITP, your experience also as working with displaced children in Syria? What are the challenges? How is a local organization like Humas coping, navigating in response to the needs of the IDPs in very difficult circumstances? So thank you very much for joining, and the floor is yours. Mrs. Alamar?
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but voilà, now we see you also. And welcome very much. Huh?
That's great. Thank you so much for inviting me to this event. Well, as for my story, it was in the early spring of 2018 when we were bidding farewell to our friends with teary eyes as bus convoys were taking them to the unknown. We didn't want to leave before making sure that every member of our team was safe. Later, on the morning of April the 4th, it was our time to leave. The morning was as chaotic as most mornings during the recent military campaign against Eastern Ghouta. I had to finalize some unfinished work before leaving. Everything left like a bad dream until we reached the bus station in the afternoon. Maybe I can share some content to show you, but I need to be able to share photos, if you please. In the bus station, the hours felt extremely long and heavy. The uncertainty was overwhelming. We didn't know what would happen. Will these buses take off at all? Are we destined to live enough to board them? The image of one of our friends who was killed by a stray bullet in his head while boarding the bus before even experiencing the displacement with his family didn't leave my head. There was news about convoys being deliberately redirected by the Syrian government to pass through villages loyal to it and then subjected to stoning and shooting. Our anxiety grew by sundown, and finally, just before night, the 13 buses reluctantly moved. I was with my family and the families of our friends and neighbors, all with children. We were all civilians, as were the majority of the passengers of other buses. There were about 10 children in our yellow bus, including my two daughters. We were holding them tight when the soldiers stepped up to search at the first checkpoint. Their looks spread terror as they inspected our backpacks, but all passed safely. As the bus drove further, we were so surprised to see the street lights and the lights from houses on both sides of the road. The skin was so strange after living the complete darkness of Eastern Ghouta nights for 5 years. Another frightening stop lasted for hours when we reached the highway between Damascus and Homs. Our concerns kept growing and wiped the sleep from our eyes. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Yeah. Those concerns didn't go away even after the convoy set out again. There were traces of previous gunshots that broke our window. We arrived at the camp in Azaz, north of Aleppo, on Thursday at around 7:30 p.m. That is 28 hours of travel, a trip that normally takes no longer than 6 hours. We were exhausted. We had no plans for future. We didn't even know where we would stay that night. Luckiest of us was my baby girl. You can only imagine how happy she was. when she saw the sunshine again after spending months in the darkness of underground shelters in Douma. Besides, she was the only one who had enough sleep during the most worrying times. But Imar, my 6-year-old daughter at that time, remained silent most of the time. And when she spoke, she often asked me about Maria, her best friend who stayed back, and about the rest of her friends. We know now that she developed separation anxiety and negative coping habits, but we also know now how fortunate she was compared to what happened to her peers who suffered and continue suffering in Idlib and northern Aleppo. For instance, Imar didn't experience the pain of separation, as did the 45 children documented by the Child Protection Cluster in December 2019 alone. What happened to us was just another episode of what repeatedly happened in many other regions, such as in Daraya, Aleppo, Al-War neighborhood, Madaya, Zabadani, Yarmouk camp, and Daraa. Each of those instances can and should be considered a crime against humanity committed by the Syrian government forces. Here, it is worth noting a major crime that has no proper reference in the international humanitarian law, as it defines the crime of forced displacement. We are talking about the largest wave of displacement since the beginning of the conflict. About 1 million people were forcibly displaced to escape the indiscriminate shelling of the Syrian government forces on the countrysides of Idlib and Aleppo. 80% of them are women and children, according to UN estimates. Many of them had to sleep outside of the already overcrowded camps in freezing temperatures. Many of them were originally displaced, exaggerating their tragedy. My child didn't live the miserable conditions of the displacement shelters, where other children freeze to death, where securing food and water is a daily suffering, where bathing is a luxury, and where access to shelter, warmth, sanitation, and health is extremely difficult, if not impossible. My Imar, 9 years old now, has never completed one academic year since she entered the school. First due to indiscriminate shelling, repeated displacement, and then due to the COVID-19. But she was also fortunate as she didn't have a disability, because children with disabilities rely heavily on daily routines. Imagine how hard it is for them to develop the ability to move independently from home to school and to break the barriers with other children and teachers. And then imagine how difficult it will be for them to start all over again in a new place. Believe me, it is 1,000 times harder. During the last military campaign against Eastern Ghouta in November 2017, many schools were directly targeted by the shelling. That was a message that they wanted us to leave. One of the mothers in Idlib say, "We know now that we have to start packing when a school is bombed." At last, I want to clarify that we didn't want to leave. Staying was not a real choice for us. If by choice you mean being persecuted, executed, tortured, imprisoned, or forced to serve in a military that kills civilians, similar to what happened to many of those who stayed, according to eyewitnesses. We didn't want to leave. I and my family and hundreds of thousands of forcibly displaced want to go back to our homes, to our cities, to our relatives and friends. However, we want a safe return, a return that guarantees our safety, dignity, and rights. Not like what happened to my friend who returned with her 2 children, only to be arrested at a checkpoint by the Syrian government. Despite the alleged guarantees, she was blackmailed for her release, and she is being threatened and prevented from traveling, and subjected to constant blackmail to give up her property. What we urgently need today is increased support for displaced children through protection and education programs, because the current support is far from sufficient given the magnitude of the humanitarian crisis. I'm saying it is insufficient as we in Horace Network have documented the death of 7 children between mid-January and mid-February 2020 due to the cold or due to fire in camps. One of those children could have been mine or any who were born in Syria. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, that was a very moving story, and of course, it's very striking and typical for an IDP. And Syria is, of course, a very, very difficult environment. So thank you very much for sharing your experience, and thanks also for the work that you keep on doing for displaced children in Syria, for your organization for us. I see that means.
Thank you so much. As a final word, we strongly believe that child protection should be high on the agenda of international humanitarian efforts. This is why we call for the mandate of the International Commission of Inquiry on the Syrian Arab Republic to be expanded to focus clearly on violations against children. The Commission procedures should allocate resources and specialities indeed to monitor and document violations against children. Second, we call upon the international community to take effective measures to put an end, or at least reduce, school targeting. We also believe that your presence, your actual and physical presence, and your direct involvement would significantly improve the intervention measures. That's why we strongly urge you to visit us and take a close look at our work with children. I extend this invitation to all of you, especially to Mrs. Magrini, and I'm confident you will see through the eyes of our children how important and urgent this work is. Again, I want to emphasize on the right of safe and voluntary return for all IDPs, and on the importance of providing support for rebuilding our homes, securing compensation for damages, and offering support for programs that help reacquire our houses, lands, and properties. In parallel, we want to increase support for displaced children through protection and education programs, and to make sure children with disabilities are integrated and included more in these programs. Let me please share my screen with you. Here are some of the photos I wanted to show you the first time. We're waiting for the buses, looking to the future throughout a broken window, my little daughters, and here's the little one. Thousands of Idlib, and last one, my friend. While I was preparing my talking points, we received the devastating news about the death of our dear friend and colleague Zakwan Kahale, one of the first peaceful activists in the Syrian uprising. Zakwan died in a tragic accident. He was an IDP himself, but the displacement separated him from his wife and child, with whom he tried to unite for a long time without success. He was in coma during the last 2 weeks, away from those who deserve to be near him the most. In honor of his memory, I would to call upon all of you and us too to do everything we can to bring justice to the displaced and to help them reunite with their families and loved ones while they are still alive. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Maimona. I think that was a very powerful message, and also a very strong message, very moving story. It underlines also the challenges that are out there. And thanks to all the panelists again for being with us. Thanks also for the co-chairs for being with us. We are very much in support of the work of the high-level panel. And I think this seminar underlines again the important work that you are doing and that you will be doing. I know that COVID-19 is probably making your life more complicated because it will be difficult to travel. But on the other hand, as you said, Mrs. Mogherini, it's also an opportunity. I mean, I think we have to, as you said, we have to work both on the states, the host states, work on the responsibility, work on the willingness, work on the capacity. And we have to work also on our own approach and be more innovative, be quicker, be able to work more integrated, to be able to also to make sure that people are still willing to work with the IDPs in the camps in South Sudan and other places. And of course, work also on the drivers of displacements. So with all this, I think we are very much in support of the work that the panel and you are doing, and count always on our support in order to try to help you in your difficult work, because we do this for the 50 million IDPs that are there in the world in very precarious circumstances. So thank you all. I wish you all the best, and let's remain in touch. I know that many people still wanted to take the floor. I'm sorry that the time was a bit too short, but we have seen also many of your questions in the chat box and also many of the recommendations, and we will certainly make sure that the panel gets them and that we also can reply maybe through other ways to the questions that you have. So thank you very much. Have a good day, and let's continue the fight and use COVID-19 as an opportunity. Thank you.